So some people on Reddit asked for this, and I will deliver. This is how you automate your coil unit, your electric discharge coil, to fire on its own. So you won't need to press any buttons, it'll automatically fire when the enemy's hit. Okay, so start off, the first thing you need is a motion detector. Motion detector is the bread and butter on this. Now, I was able to finagle this one outside. It doesn't really matter where you put it as long as it's on the right side of like your sub that your coil is on. So essentially, you can actually get these things like inside the walls here. Before I had this one, there was one that was inside the wall, and it worked really well. The only problem was to access it, you would have to cut into the wall every single time. Now, first we'll take a look at the settings here. So you want the target to be monster, right? And you want it to ignore the dead. So if it doesn't ignore the dead, what's going to happen is the monster's going to die. It's going to get underneath your sub, and it's going to keep firing this motion sensor, and it's going to keep setting up your discharge coils. Ignore dead. Range, you want the range to be essentially just the dimensions of the discharge coil. I measured mine by basically just increasing the numbers until when it would charge the discharge the discharge coil, like it wouldn't shock the shit out of me anymore. So I had this set to any. And then range, obviously, as far down as the discharge coil can reach. I have mine set to 300 on Y. Obviously, this flipped, you're gonna do like minus 300 or something. I don't know, whatever. Play with it. You'll figure out your dimensions. Output's gonna be 1. Your output 1. And when you go to rewire this, you're going to have state output when it picks up a yes to an AND component. Essentially, that AND component's going to check your capacitor charge, and if your motion detector is putting out a 1, and if they're both yes, it will fire off your discharge coil. Now, your supercapacitors will be wired obviously to this, and then you'll have your AND component with the trigger bit. Let's go inside, take a look. This essentially blue wire is hooked up to the supercapacitor. So, okay, here we go. AND component. So, the brown, I have 2 motion detectors set up. One of them is inside the walls. It's like over here. And the other one's right here. Okay, so if either one of those put out a yes, it's going to say signal yes right here. For signal 2 for this AND. Because for an AND component, it needs both to put out. It needs both, like 2 yeses to put out. 2 yeses on either terminal, on both terminals, to put out a charge to actually trigger the discharge coil. So I have the navigational terminal hooked up to this as well, so that I can't keep firing it and fucking the guns over it, because if you run out of supercapacitor charge, your guns will cut. They'll be kaput. Okay. But essentially this just goes straight to the discharge coil, and this one, signal input 2, goes to your motion detector output, and then this one comes from your supercapacitors, which I'll show in just a sec. So you want to make sure that they're separate. You want to make sure that your power output and your motion detectors and your button presses are separate. Because if not, it defeats the whole purpose. Right. It defeats the whole purpose of trying to conserve power. Because essentially what happens is if you have both of them on one terminal, the AND gate won't put out anything. And this is a really good way to get it automated. There's other ways you can do it probably. I have made some like weird setups here, which like technically works, but this is the most effective and simplest way I found. Anyways, okay, here we go. So you have your supercapacitors right. Without this little setup right here, your supercapacitors will endlessly discharge whenever an enemy gets close, and it will drain your supercapacitors from full to 0 in a matter of seconds. And so your guns will be able to fire, and you'll be a sitting duck. So essentially, we'll work from supercapacitors back. Okay, so supercapacitors, both of these gates right here are connected to charge percentage. So the percent charge is what I'm going off of here. The first gate that they go to is the signal check component. Now, supercapacitor charge percent is signal in, and greater component is the signal out. So essentially what this does is the charge percentage will come in, and you'll say 50%. If the charge percentage is 50%, then it will put out a 1. Yeah, so this just checks to make sure it's 50%. And we'll put out a 1. So right here. Okay. So this is your greater than percentage, right? So signal in 50%, right? It'll be your supercapacitor charge. So if your supercapacitor charge is, for example, 45%, it'll compare it to your signal check component, which is 50%, and it'll say no, it won't put out a 1. It will put out a 0, false output, so nothing. And then the signal out won't happen. Like there won't be a signal out. Like it'll put out a 0, which isn't a 1, and so it won't actuate your AND gate. And so essentially what this does is it says, is it 50%? Yes, no. And then it will, this greater component will say, hey, is the supercapacitor greater than 50%? No. And then it won't fire. It won't put out a signal, and it won't fire. So that essentially just keeps it so that if a bunch of enemies get underneath and they keep hitting, and you have enemies on top and you're shooting, whatever, you don't watch your supercapacitor down here go and just like cut. So that's your power management. Now, what I'm going to do is, I tried out some like Wi-Fi components, and it was too complicated. This is easy. I suck with Wi-Fi, but I will go and like test this out. So you can set this for testing purposes to people and shock the fuck out of yourself, and it's a great idea. So, motion detector, but immediately shocks me. No one's pressing any buttons, no one's there, right? Now, this is best to test in port, because if you have to do any sort of cutting for like wiring and whatnot, you won't immediately sync. And at the same time, your crew will like leave you alone, like they won't freak out that you're cutting into the walls. Now, that set the charge below 50%, so it's not fired. I believe that outpost power doesn't doesn't charge the supercapacitors very fast. So I'm going to go up and just manually like change the recharge rate. When you start messing around with power systems like this, it's a little finicky sometimes, and okay, we'll crank it up to 100%. Alright, 44%, 45%, 46%. Let's get down there before it hits 50 so we can show off how it should work. So it should be 50% in 46 seconds. I'll show you like the range that this thing has. Well, actually, right about here, it's the shock stuff. We haven't seen it shock stuff around here. Actually, I know you use that range, but this setup has been pretty effective for me personally. It's my automated system, and if you have like a small group, it's fantastic. It's great. You never have to worry about it. It's all hands off, and it's just like one less thing to worry about. But anyways, yeah, if you want to give your system, if you want to like set one of these up for yourself, I highly recommend it. Yeah, you can basically just follow this, and it'll work. You can probably make it a little more efficient, and you can probably like find out exactly how much power from your supercapacitors this electric discharge quality sucks up, and like really optimize it to like how much power you want to have left over and whatnot, depending on like the size of your sub and whatever. For the work of this one, so it's really good. Anyways, yeah, if you're interested in doing something.